Well, hey everyone. So we'll get started now. Much smaller group than we've had. In the past, which is good. I think that's great. You know, in the past we've had 300 people on these calls. Has really tapered down since April now into May wise. So we'll give quick introductions for ourselves. Elaine will discuss more about what she experienced in the month of April wise, and then we'll open it up to your questions. And the great thing is you have our undivided attention. So, and Rena, I would say hello. Rena's attending from London, England. So hello, Rena. Welcome. My name's Alex Wilson, broker owner of Remax Wealth Builders Real Estate. I've been selling real estate for 11 years now here in Toronto. Also a condo investor like yourselves. I have 14 condos, a triplex in High Park, and an apartment building in Hamilton. So my portfolio ranges across many different types of real estate ownership. And I can say from my experience over the years is that condos have proven to be the easiest by far of the investment class. So I get to share my experience, and I also own a property management company as well. So I have my experiences based on being an investor like you, also having the management of our clients' portfolios as well, and what we've seen over the month of April as different requests have come in from tenants wise. To my left, we have Kyle Dovigi, our Director of Operations at Remax Wealth Builders Real Estate, also a condo investor and a investment specialist, salesperson wise. He'll be moderating questions that come through. And then our guest of honor at the bottom, Elaine Page, award-winning paralegal, Paralegal of the Year, awarded by the Ontario Law Society in 2013. She's been in the business for 25 plus years and offers a wealth of knowledge wise. So what spurred these webinars, this is our sixth and final one, was that when COVID-19 came into existence wise, the Landlord and Tenant Board suspended the eviction process and any evictions that were deemed to happen indefinitely. So if a tenant didn't pay their rent, usually your recourse is that you can start the eviction process to remove that tenant. We have lost that ability. And it was quite publicized in the media in regards to, okay, we have suspended the evictions, whether you're moving into the unit or whether your tenant doesn't pay. We are not evicting tenants wise. So that really caught up a lot of steam in the media wise, and then even to the mayor of Toronto and the premier of the province wise, saying that you will not be kicked. The message was you will not be kicked out of your home if you don't pay rent, which caused a lot of panic with landlords, especially the small landlords in the business wise. So we came up with these webinars to help offer solutions to condo investors and landlords wise. What can you do? And I'm going to open up the floor now to Elaine, who's been fielding these calls for a month now. First of all, Elaine, why don't you let everyone know on the call, if they don't already know, what a paralegal is and how a paralegal operates in Ontario?
Sure, thanks. And Alex, I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you and Kyle for putting these together. A lot of the feedback that I've been getting is what a great service it has been for all of these landlords who had no other mechanism of gaining information. So you've really done a good deed. So I just wanted to thank you for that. A paralegal is we're licensed with the Law Society of Ontario. We are the only place in the world where such an animal exists. You've probably heard the term before, and it's generally used in the States and other parts of the world, where it really means something different. It usually, in those parts of the world, means somebody who assists a lawyer. In Ontario, we're licensed to provide certain types of legal services and appear in certain courts and at certain boards. And I appear regularly at the Landlord and Tenant Board on behalf of both landlords and tenants.
Great. And So Elaine, what was April like for you?
It was crazy actually. There was in a good way. There were a lot of landlords who were just in absolute panic because their mortgages were contingent on paying the tenants paying rent, and there was so much fear. And we managed to resolve a lot of the issues between the landlord and tenants by encouraging communication. In some cases, I did the communication and negotiation on behalf of the landlords. So, and I think you used this stat last time. I think we had about 85% of rents being paid, which was great because under normal circumstances, the number is probably about 5% different. So it ended up being okay, really, at the end of the day, because people manage their properties well.
Yeah, and from our experiences on my personal units, all my units paid. Kyle, did you get rent on May 1st? Kyle got rent May 1st. And why I bring up Kyle, and I always bring up Kyle's tenant and one of his properties wise, he has a bartender that lives in one of his condos, and original tenant, he's had the property for 4 years now, and clearly the person's unemployed, and she's communicated with Kyle in March that she doesn't have a job. Obviously she doesn't have a job, and she's been paying her rent on time. But the key thing through this whole process is having dialogue with your tenants wise, especially when that communication went out in the media by government officials saying that you are not going to be evicted if you can't pay your rent. So with this dialogue wise, I would say there's different levels of dialogue that people have within individuals, right? I'd say 80% of people, you're not even going to hear from your tenants wise. Then another 15%, you're probably going to have some conversations with your tenants wise, and there may be difficulties coming up. So again, going back to Kyle wise, where there's some difficulties, potential difficulties, communication was had and there's been no issues with payment wise. Or there may be people going to you as a tenant wise going, I've been laid off. I've applied for government subsidies wise. Things are really hard for me over this period wise. Can we work out some sort of deal wise in regards to a rent deferral? And why I say rent deferral, and Elaine will agree, we've had lots of conversations about this. A rent deferral means that they still owe you the money at some sort of future period. Your mortgage payment, most likely you're still paying your mortgage payment. You probably haven't had a deferral on it because it is an investment property. There are cases that you've been able to get deferrals on your investment properties, but you have to show a lot of financial hardship in order to get the bank to approve that. But you still have to come up with that money. Your maintenance fees, still have to pay your maintenance fees. Your property taxes, there have been some deferrals on property taxes wise, but you still owe that money at some sort of future date. So all your expenses are still owed at some point. The same thing with a tenant wise. If they're in a current financial hardship wise, then you do want to speak with them, right? And when I say speak with them, you want to have the conversation. You want to ask the right questions to make sure that they are truly experiencing financial hardship. So again, 80% you're not going to hear from. 15%, maybe some communication going, hey, this is what's up. I'm going to have some issues with this. Then you have maybe your 5% that are trying to push the envelope a little bit and going, hey, you know what? This is the great opportunity for me to not pay my rent right now, and I'm not going to pay my rent. So you got to ask the right questions to make sure that someone isn't trying to take advantage of the current situation. So if someone does come to you asking for some sort of deferral, ask why. Ask if they've applied for the subsidies. If they say they've been laid off, ask for a record of employment wise. Now, they don't have to provide you with any of this, but if you ask them the question wise, the charlatans will quickly show their true colors wise, and may just go, hey, don't worry about it. I found ways to come up with the money wise to pay you your monthly rent. But let's say if the case is truly a case where it's a deferral wise, that's where you come up to an agreement with your tenant and put an agreement in place so that you have that in the future wise if you need to go to the landlord and tenant board to try to collect that money. So I think now I'll go back to Elaine wise. Elaine, why don't we talk about what a deferral looks like and talk about the N4 process wise and when you do the N4.
Okay, so I just want to clarify one particular point, which a lot of people don't realize. A lot of people have applied for the CERB, and what they don't understand is that you have to apply every period. You don't just apply for it and get a $2,000 check every month. And so some of the rents that didn't come in in May are because people didn't reapply. So one of the first things I would do if I were a landlord who had rent arrears but got my rent in April and not in May is make sure that the tenant's aware that they need to reapply for the CERB. And it's a phone call. It's an automated call, and it takes maybe 2.5 minutes. You're not on hold. It's not a big deal. And then the money comes in. So that, before I would go into anything else, I'd make sure that the tenant's aware of that, because people definitely were not. To answer your question, the agreements, it depends. Each situation is different. So there's a big difference between a tenant who's been there for 4 or 5 years, never had a rent payment issue, and now is coming and saying, I've got a problem, I've been laid off, or whatever their issue is. So there's a difference between them and somebody who's been in the unit for 4 months, who's been in arrears prior to COVID. As well, there's a difference between a tenant who has been in the unit for 7 or 8 months that is experiencing a problem now. So basically the differences are a long-term tenant who you've had a good relationship with, we might just do some kind of written agreement and around a payment plan. The tenant who has been previously in arrears, if you haven't done an N4, notice of termination for non-payment of rent, I would encourage you to do one immediately. And I would also tell you to make sure you're doing it correctly, because as Alex will tell you, if you do that notice wrong and you go to issue an application, your case will get tossed. And then the person who's been there for 7 or 8 months without a problem, what I would do is a payment arrangement in writing with them, but potentially an N4 alongside of it with an understanding that you're not going to pursue the N4 unless they fail in their payment plan.
Yeah, and going back to Elaine's comment in regards of filling out the forms wise and filling out the correct forms wise, the landlord and tenant board is truly a letter of the law organization that leans towards the tenants wise. I actually would say it's a letter of the law for the landlord and spirit of the law for the tenant. That's actually probably even a better way to describe it.
Yeah, definitely.
It's going to get all the leeway. And the forms are truly a dot the I, cross the T situation. If there's an error on the form, they will throw that out. So the landlord or tenant board is always used as a last resort situation. You don't want to end up there. If you do end up there and you've spent so much time, obviously they're not processing hearings now. So when they open up, there'll be a backlog, because guess what? Before COVID-19, there was already a backlog. Now there'll be an even longer backlog. So you file something now, it opens back up. It could be another 3 to 4 month wait before you actually get some sort of hearing now. So now we're at 6 to 7 months, and you get there and they throw everything out because there's an incorrect date on the form, which truly you may think common sense says, well, but it's valid still. It's just 1 date off. Everything makes sense. They'll be like, nope, sorry, and they'll throw it at the end, start the whole process over again. Could be another 3-4 months before you get a hearing wise. So very important for those forms to be filled out. And that's actually how I know Elaine, because when I bought my current house that I live in wise, which is the triplex, one of the units we were going to owner occupy, and it was the seller's responsibility to fill out that form correctly and issue it to the tenant wise. And lo and behold, when we closed on the house, the tenant was there and didn't move out. And I ended up being homeless. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm a real estate agent and I own investment properties, and I have a tenant problem and I can't even move into my own house. And we called Elaine, and Elaine helped resolve the situation for us. And what's really important about that is, especially when there's a lot of stress on both sides. For me at that time, my stress was, I'm homeless. You're in my home, get out of my home. Unfortunately, that doesn't matter in regards to the tenant's rights. The tenant's rights still supersede my rights. So again, in regards to dealing with your investment properties now, you have expenses still, and the tenant may have income issues in regards to cash flow coming in. So the tenant's stressed because you're dealing with their home. It's still their home, even though you own it. It's their home. They're at risk of losing their home, and they have income issues, so money issues. On the other end, you have money issues because you're not getting money coming in. You're in two high stress situations. And sometimes you're not the best person to be having the conversation with the tenant wise, unfortunately, because something that the tenant says via email, because most of your communication is probably going to be via email, is going to set you off. And then once you get set off and say the wrong thing, the tenant's back is going to go like this, and now you're in a conflict situation, and good luck trying to get anything done. You're both completely stressed out. And Elaine has seen this time and time and time again and again. My own personal experience wise, I didn't have a home. I was pissed off. My wife was pissed off. She's able to come in and have those conversations for you. So just something to keep in mind, especially if there are, when we've seen these over the last month, where we're having the questions come in from the landlords wise, and like, the tenant isn't taking my calls anymore. The tenant's not responding to my emails. You're already past the line. You need to bring in some professional help. You're not going to be able to deal with the situation anymore. But the great thing is to avoid that cutoff of communication. If you're able to avoid that situation, you've eliminated, weeks of stress wondering where this person is. And Elaine, you're the one that brought this up to me, and I never thought of it, but why is it important to maintain a good dialogue with your tenant? What are they occupying?
They're occupying your asset, and they're in control of your assets. So when you start playing super hardball with them and start being overtly aggressive with them, that's when you risk having serious damage done to your unit. So you may be out your rent, but you may also be out $100,000 worth of damages in the unit. And I have seen over the years, I'm not going to say what I've too much because I don't want to give anyone any ideas. But I've seen some angry tenants who have done some pretty awful things to units. And so it's about communication. Alex, I just want to jump back for a second, if I may, around what you just talked about, the notices and the importance. As you were talking, I just got a bulletin from the court and that I was looking at. So this is for the Provincial Offences Court, which is it's not within the jurisdiction of the Landlord and Tenant Board, but it's a good example of what we can anticipate. They just announced that there will be no trials or hearings till July 6th. So that's a long period of time. So what we can extrapolate from that is, in all likelihood, all of the other judicial bodies will be following suit, which means that you would not be, if you were issuing notices now, then there'd be no hearings. I mean, there's a huge backlog already, and thousands of cases not being heard, and if they're not coming back until July, your hearing is not going to be until probably August or September. And that's a long time to be not going without rent. So that's why it becomes critically important that you work with your tenants, because I understand that the rent might be $2,000, but if you're still getting $1,000 in a month, then you're way ahead of the game than $0.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Definitely. Now, give me an idea in regards to, are there any stories you can give from this month in regards to some like a light at the end of the tunnel for a landlord that's in a bad situation?
Yeah, so I had a couple of landlords contact me, and they were, you know, really in absolute panic, and they were going to their tenants with just incessant text messages, emails, phone calls, because they were fearful of, you know, having to not the funds to be able to pay their mortgage. And the tenants and we talked about this last week, you know, mental health, right? Everybody's under stress. So to be getting incessant phone calls and text messages, it really stresses somebody out. So finally this happened in 2 cases where they said, we can't deal with our tenants. And I interceded and had a lovely conversation with the tenants. And we were able to get, not the full rent in, but enough to cover most of the mortgage on both properties. And the difference was my approach was speaking to them as a human being and not as somebody who had a hammer in hand going, if you don't pay me and pay the landlord, we're going to evict you, we're going to change the locks, we're going to do all these horrible things. We spoke to them as people, and we were able to get resolution. And that's really what you're wanting, is resolution, or at least, albeit temporary, but some kind of resolution.
Yeah, and to let everyone know, everything that's happening right now is everything's going to go back to normal at some point, and all these are short-term problems. Now, how you define short-term is different. I look at real estate as a long-term asset over decades, really. We may be in these situations for the next 6 months to a year. It could be that long. But overall, to me, that's all just short-term wise. On previous calls, I've told people, you don't want to have an empty unit right now. The rental market, you know, I've been looking at it week over week. The rental market leases in downtown Toronto are down 50% week over week. If I compare it, not week over week, if I compare it from the same week-long period last year to this year, down 50%. Last week it was 58%, and my inventory is up 242%. So I have a huge increase in supply, and my demand is cut in over half. So I don't want to have an empty unit on the market. So that's number one, supply and demand issues. Number two, a lot of buildings in downtown Toronto, we can't even show them with live in-person showings. The buildings aren't even allowing real estate showings. So I have a supply and demand issue. I have an accessibility issue. I can't even show you I may not even be able to show you the unit live. And then number three, in regards to what's coming down the pipeline, is that the city of Toronto, what's made it so strong over the years is immigration. Immigration, the economic hub of Canada wise. People flock to this area for job opportunities wise, whether it's interprovincial, whether it's city to city, and then obviously the immigration wise. Well, guess what? Borders are shut down. There's hiring freezes at companies. Again, all short-term wise, but coming into the summer wise, if my borders are still shut down and I don't get the international student population coming in, which is huge to the city of Toronto, that's going to put a huge dent in demand for 2020 for rental units. And even if they do open up, how many people are actually still going to come here? Are they going to be able to leave their countries and come here? So there may be travel issues from one country to another country. There's a lot of questions. So coming in that big September 1st is usually your busiest move-in period of the year. There is a very good chance it won't be the case this year wise. And that's going to put more vacancy on the market wise. And all that means is less rent and increased cost while you have a vacant unit wise. But if you currently have a tenant in there, you don't have to go through any of those stresses.
Right.
You work with that tenant to maintain that tenancy. You're not going to have to worry about potential vacancy issues. So that's where it's so important to have those conversation wise, because is the grass really greener on the other side if there's not someone living in there? In this case, there's a good chance it's not. So it's something to keep in mind. And then
So Alex,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, just to jump in. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day who works at one of the universities in Toronto.
Hmm.
And what she was telling me, and this goes to your point about foreign students,
Hmm.
what she was telling me was that the university is looking at the school term for starting in September and how to manage classes in big lecture halls where there's 400 or 500 people in a lecture hall and social distancing and all of that. And there is a move on at the moment to make most university courses next year virtual,
Hmm.
which they haven't announced. So in keeping with what you're talking about, these foreign students may be back at home in their own countries learning through a virtual system. Now, this is just what they're talking about. I don't want anyone to take the takeaway to be, oh my God, they're doing this. They are planning for it to some degree. It may or may not be necessary, and I think they're going to let students know at the end of June. So at the end of June, if that is something that's happening, then you might want to just check in with Alex around what's your best option if you're traditionally housing foreign students.
Yeah, I'm not even worried about that again in the medium to long term wise. It would just be an acute problem for 2020.
Right.
Kyle, unmute for a second? Kyle took quantum mechanics. Kyle, could you imagine taking quantum mechanics virtually?
No. There's a lot of programs like that that you just can't take remotely. It needs to be hands-on, physical, or have interaction with the instructor.
Yeah, or what about when you built the calculator?
A mail home, do-at-home kit, but yeah, it was very challenging. But I guess find ways.
Yeah. Anything that I'm just trying to make sure people don't panic wise. Anything they're talking about, it's only going to be temporary wise in regards to the it's basically trying to put a Band-Aid on the situation because they won't be able to do it. But you'll never have a replacement in regards to the in-class learning experience wise. Talk to any parent right now that's homeschooling. Dying. They are dying. And me, myself, I know, I'm a parent excuse me, with an 8-month-old and a 2-year-old right now. If I took this virtual background off, you see what kind of hole I'm in working out of in the basement wise. It's very difficult for me to get work done at home in these situations wise. So anything right now is only Band-Aid solutions. They're going to be great strides in regards to efficiencies that are built into the situation.
Right.
You are going to still see, it's going to reinforce the values of in-person learning and working wise, but also build in some efficiencies on the other end in regards to virtual situations that need. So I'll go back to Kyle wise, whose wife is working from home, but she's in the pharmaceutical industry wise. Her commute is terrible wise. I would say this will probably open up some things for her in regards to working from home a little more, right?
Yeah, I think her company is going to be much more open to that moving forward.
So yeah, so I think you'll have a better balance between the two at the end of that. That was overdue and happening wise. So these are positives that are gonna come out of this immediate in the long term. So I think I'm going on a tangent, which I do sometimes. So I'll let Kyle bring the conversation back. Should we open up questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple there.
Can I just, sorry,
of
Pat,
course
let me just jump in on other, I didn't mean to scare people on the university.
No, it's fine.
We don't know. But the second thing I wanted to say, one of the things that I have been seeing lately that's also positive is some of the tenants who have been really fussy about very small and minor maintenance issues. You know, like my bathroom caulking around the tub is discolored, where before they were very vigilant about demanding those sorts of services. They've definitely backed off and are being much more relaxed about some of the minor maintenance stuff, which is really good because, again, it helps, you know, confirm the relationship between the two parties, but it also means that landlords aren't getting hassled over small maintenance issues.
Mm-hmm. Great. So Kyle, why don't we open it up?
Yeah, great. So Brenda has a question about parking spaces, and this is kind of an interesting one. Do the same rules apply to parking spaces and locker rentals as they do to units?
So in a landlord and tenant relationship in normal situations, tenants aren't actually allowed to rent out their parking. The parking spot and locker is rented from the landlord, and they're not able to sublet. In condominiums, the condominium unit may come with a parking spot, and those are not the same rules that apply to somebody who's inhabiting a unit.
Okay, so say even someone bought 2 units, one is rented with their unit and the other, they're just renting to someone else in the building then. So the same rules do not apply as the would
No.
tenanted units to those,
No.
to lockers or parking in that situation.
Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, first of all, the condo rules, there's certain condo rules that relate to the rental of parking spots, and probably it's probably not legal under the condo rules. And if it were, it's a commercial relationship. You're renting a parking spot. Sorry, I interrupted you, Alex. What were you going to say?
Oh yeah. So ultimately, if you're renting a parking spot, it's not covered under landlord and tenant board. Correct? The short part of that question?
Sorry? Wait,
Oh, if you're renting a parking spot separate from the unit, it's not a landlord and tenant board issue.
right.
Okay, perfect.
Right. So Rena seems to have a complicated situation, and Rena, it might be best to reach out to Elaine directly, but we'll try and answer some different components of the question that you've posed. So Rena has a tenant that did not pay rent on May 1st. They're trying to get the rent to her, but it looks like they're having complications for whatever reason. How long should she wait before issuing an N4?
I would be issuing it right away. And Rena, just so you know, because I'm looking at your question, the tenancy is up at the end of July. Just because your lease agreement is up at the end of July does not mean the tenancy is up. The tenant automatically becomes a month-to-month tenant at that point. And so you could be in for a much longer period of time, which is one of the reasons I would say, let's do the N4. And what we typically do in these situations is we say, we understand your situation, we know you're working on it, but in order to preserve our rights, we're sending you this notice.
Yeah, and this is where dialogue comes to important. That's important. Wise is that you submit the N4 just as your insurance policy, but you're just communicating with the tenants, letting them know, I need to do this to protect my asset. But I'm here to work with you to try to resolve this situation. So I will go back to our experiences over April wise. And Elaine will probably agree to a lot of things I say. In April, personally, all my rents came in. We have the management company. By the end of April, all our units under management had paid except one, and the one that didn't pay, they were a chronic problem. They just didn't pay before COVID. This was always in a situation wise, and they actually had an eviction order on them, mutual client for Elaine and I. So, but it didn't mean that all the rents came in April 1st. So April 1st to April 30th, it was working with tenants. Again, the majority of people had paid. There's probably about 90% that it came in and over the following weeks in April wise, and various people had different situations. The final one that came in, we had constant communication with that tenant wise. His company hadn't paid him yet. And finally his payment for his company came through. He was a contract worker. Things seem to be sorted out now, but it was a constant communication wise. We never put up a brick wall with the person wise. We demand your money. We're like, okay, well, keep us posted. Lots of follow-up on our end, but positive follow-up. Reading this situation-wise, seems like there could be some legitimacy here. So I would just say constant communication and just touching base with them. Hey, any luck with the situation being being resolved wise. You just keep me posted on things, because ultimately landlord and tenant board is well, not that it's not open, but is not issuing evictions wise. So even if you were to take a hard stance on them, there is no eviction that can actually happen to these individuals wise. So it's better to sell with sugar versus salt wise, in regards to, you know, be sweet to them, but don't be a pushover either. You don't want to be a pushover, but just keep on working with them, communicating with them wise. Hey, any luck with the payment coming through and everything like that. I do know of another client that we have wise, where they're not residents of Canada. They don't have citizenship here in Canada wise, and they have some issues wise, and the landlord and them were working through it and everything like that. But they don't. If you're not a Canadian citizen, you don't apply to. You don't get any of the subsidies or benefits that the government's asking for. So these individuals fall into a different category wise. So communicate with the person, maintain that communication. That's the best thing that you can do right now, because you don't have recourse. You have no recourse. So you just want to maintain that positive but firm, understanding way to deal with them wise, to help to collect that payment.
And don't make the mistake, I got some calls on this week, where we have tenants who are stuck in other countries, they can't get back, or a similar situation to what we're talking about presently. And so the landlords have said, well, they're not here and they're not using the unit, so can we change the locks? And the answer is absolutely not. So don't get suckered into doing something that could end up being potentially very dangerous for you down the line in terms of fines and huge problems.
And here's what it ultimately is. Her husband lost a job and didn't pay rent on May 1st, but the funds are coming from Kenya wise. Hey, he's probably can't get back to Kenya anyway, so he still needs someone. So they're again, reading into the situation wise, they're probably motivated to pay because they need to maintain a roof over their heads. So just maintain positive but firm communication is the best way to deal with it. Okay.
Great advice. So Brenda asks, do you still issue an N4 if you defer rent?
As I said at the beginning, it depends on the situation. You know, if it's a 5-year tenancy, never an issue. I wouldn't necessarily issue an N4. We look at each situation uniquely and independently before assessing whether to do an N4. One of these other things I just wanted to mention about N4s, and you know, Alex was talking about filling out the forms correctly earlier. One of the things that I've been seeing by landlords is, let's say the April's rent, or let's even take it back before that. March's rent is not paid and N4 gets issued. Then April's rent is not paid. Then they're issuing a second N4. And now we're into May, and May's rent is not been paid, and now they're issuing a third N4. That is not how N4s work. You do not need to issue a new N4 every month. And in fact, if you do, all the tenant has to do is say, I was confused because I got 3 different N4s with 3 different days, termination dates on the notice, and I didn't understand. And the board will say, yep, you're right, and throw it out. So don't do that.
Perfect.
KF has a question. He says, in Quebec is paying $1,000 to renters to pay their rent and $500 moving costs if they need to move out. Do you know if Ontario is going to be providing the same support to small landlords?
Not likely.
No.
We don't know. You know, we don't work in the governmental office. It's not likely that that's going to happen because the CERB is supposed to take care of some of those issues. Now, that could change. I don't have any inside information, but my guess is not likely.
Yeah, I don't think so either. In regards to what you hear in the media wise and political notes that are picked up, there's nowhere near that it being up in the forefront of topics wise in regards to where funding is and everything like that for small Well, for residential landlords, it's not even being brought up for the residential landlords wise. And the fact that if we look April 1st, 85% of people paid their rent wise based on statistics that were able to be collected. It's not a situation where it seems to be over concern wise. Now which we don't talk about, but on the commercial side, many more problems on the commercial side. That's where you saw a federal subsidy program that came in. I'm reading locally wise, reading about restaurant closures, like institutions closing left, right, and center. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get pizza anymore because pizza places keep on closing in my neighborhood wise. And you're gonna see the same things happen on shops wise and everything like that. So commercial is a whole nother beast wise, where there are a lot of issues. But I don't think you'll see anything on the residential side. Again, they may be, but I don't think it'll happen. And
all the questions that we have.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions? Enter it into the chat or the Q&A panel.
Let's just double check the Q&A. I know Rena said thank you. Okay, so that's all answered. Well, thank you everyone for coming on. This has been recorded. We had a small and mighty group, so this will still be emailed out to everyone and sent. I still think we had some good chat and some good content that'll be posted up on this. Elaine, thank you so much for taking on this time. This is our final one of these. We're gonna have a new topic coming up. Actually on Friday, we're going to be starting to talk about tax because your tax has been deferred. Your deadline has been deferred to till June 1st. So we're going to start doing tax webinars. But Elaine, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been great having you on over the last 6 webinars. I've learned so much, and we know the people that came on too. So thank you so much. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you again for doing this, Alex. It really has been, it's been a lot of fun for me, and I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, and I shouldn't say it's our final. I'm sure we'll do another one in the future wise, maybe in about who knows when. And then we'll send it out to everyone again, and we'll do a recap. Probably when we reopen up and, hey, what to experience wise? What can you do? Okay.
Take care, guys. Be well.
Everyone.